pass to the remainder man. So here's what people do. Yes, sir.
They can come back for it to they call it reversion to come back to your assets.
Well,
to your,
I'm sorry. I'm using the term kind of interchangeably. In the first case, when title would come back to somebody for a violating a condition, that was called a reversion or a reverter. Title reverts back based upon the violation of a condition. That's a reverter. This is called a remainder.
third party.
And the reason it's a remainder is it is the remainder man who's going to get the property at the end of the life estate has rights during the life estate too. There's a relationship between the two of them that we'll talk about in a minute, but I want to tell you where these things come from. As an estate planning tool, older folks want to know that their property is going to pass to their kids, but they want the right to live there for their lives. If I deed it to my kids now, yeah, what if they sell it and kick me out? I want to retain the life estate. But I want to go ahead and transfer an interest to the children now, so that automatically upon my death the children will have it. It's used a lot. And one of the reasons it's used, and we're going to talk about real estate taxes later, and we're going to talk about homestead later, but is homestead exemption. Homestead exemption on your real estate taxes. If you have a life tenant on your property, you still get homestead exemption. But if I stayed here and I went ahead and deeded it to my kids and they owned it, they don't live here, homestead exemption is gone. So it's a way to keep homestead exemption. It's a way to retain the ownership, the right to occupy the property, but to know immediately where it's going to pass. No, not necessarily your kids. Do it to anybody. I retain the right to live here for life, and upon my death it goes to my friend Joe. You can do that. There are two ways, and I alluded to that just now, of the way these things are created. If I own a piece of property, now these are usually homes, because we're usually talking about residential. If I own a house, I can deed to you a life estate. I can give you the right to live there for your life. I retain the remainder we talked about. Then I'm the remainder man. It was my house, but I'm the remainder man. I keep the remainder. I gave you a life estate. What usually happens is just the opposite. Usually, I go ahead and convey the remainder interest to somebody else. I give a deed to my kids. Prepare, record a deed from me to my children, and in the deed I say, but I reserve to myself a life estate. I hold back the right for me to occupy the property for the rest of my life. And that's a life estate. Yes.
If someone does that, and can they go back to the attorney and change that afterwards?
No, absolutely not. This is irrevocable.
Wow.
If your kids agree, they can. But in other words, if the kids come in with it, yeah, then we can change it. The point I'm trying to make is the person who has the remainder has rights.
Right.
And unless the person who has the remainder agrees with you if you're the life tenant, only then can you change it. This is permanent stuff.
So
and that's why often you don't want to go ahead and deed it to your kids, and then they're bad. Well, give it back. No, I don't think so. You know.
That's my question.
And if and if later you decided I didn't want it to pass to my kids at all, that's too bad.
Too bad.
Yeah, I'd rather go to charity. If my kid turned out to be so bad that I'd rather have given it to the Humane Society. Too bad. The kid's a remainder man. He's got the right. When you're dead, he's getting it. End of story. This is irreversible. Yeah, this is a recording a deed. Yes, sir.
What if, for instance, say like your parents are living in this house and they want to, what if they start getting to like, an age where health conditions deteriorate You say the best interest is you need to get out of here and go somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
But you have a life estate deeding to yourself and, say, I'm the son. And can you act like as a power of attorney, say, I want this to stay this way, I don't want them to go this, because I know as soon as it comes to me, it's over. I'll deed it, if it violates that, I mean.
I'm not sure I followed your
Is
question.
there like a
in the
health
sense of
condition or a way
who's
to
wanting
get around?
change it? You're just saying the kid wants to
Yeah,
say,
kid wants to change it.
say that when they die, I don't want the property?
Right.
Sell it to somebody else then.
At that
I
point,
mean,
you have all rights.
It doesn't cost you anything to be the remainder man.
Okay,
So when they die, it's yours.
okay.
You don't want it, sell it. But there's no reason that I can think of that as the remainder man during your parents' life that you would say, I don't want to be the remainder man.
Except for tax reasons. Except what is the large estate that comes to you and and you gotta pay.
Well,
your
that's a
capital
different issue.
gains
You
and
can
all.
disclaim, but
Right.
estate taxes are not based on how much you're going to receive, they're based on how big the estate is anyway.
Okay.
So there's nothing you're going to really do right now that's going to take it out of your parents' estate.
What if they did a huge home and estate and they refinanced it? Does that all come to you as well?
The mortgage?
The mortgage?
Oh, the
was-
mortgage is on there. Yeah, if they pay off the mortgage, great. If they
So
haven't
what if
paid
they
off the
don't own it
mortgage,
free
well,
and
it's still
clear?
on there, you know.
The remainder man is liable for it?
The remainder man either pays for it or loses the property in a foreclosure, yeah.
Ah.
I mean, you can't say, my parents died, they forgot to pay off the mortgage,
Right.
therefore, bank, you don't get your money. It's on there.
Maybe
But
that
that's,
is the
but that's
reason
kind of
you
different.
maybe you don't want it at the end.
No,
Would that
you
affect?
still, take it,
Would
take
that,
it.
would that affect?
Worst that
this
happens is
property?
you lose it.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you can sell it.
Mhm.
Hopefully it's worth more than
More than
the
it
mortgage.
was, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
If it's not, you know,
Yeah, unless
If
it's
it's not-
upside down on the
Yeah,
mortgage,
I mean, it's not to say,
and it will affect your credit.
right?
let me talk to you about some of the things that you can do with it and you can't do with it. But first I want to establish a little bit the relationship between the two parties that we just talked about. The life tenant, the person that owns a life estate, has to pay the taxes, has to pay the insurance, has to maintain the property. Can't do anything that really hurts the property as to the remainder man. In other words, can't knock the house down. That wouldn't be fair to the remainder man. The remainder man has a legal enforceable right now, but it just doesn't come into play yet. So you can't do things that are gonna act to the detriment of the remainder man. That's why you gotta keep it insured. It might burn down. Then when he gets it, it doesn't have a house anymore. It's important to know, and I want to call a big distinction against a case that I think is misleading here in the book. You have the right to occupy the property for the rest of your life. You don't have to. You don't have to live there. It doesn't mean, poof, it's gone if I decide to live somewhere else. The life tenant has the right to be the sole occupant of the property if he wants to be for the rest of his life, but he sure doesn't have to be. There's a case here in the text, in this chapter, that goes on ad nauseum about whether somebody lost their life estate because they left the property. Hell, they may leave, they may go to a nursing home, go in the hospital, you're getting old, you're gonna be gone a lot. There is no requirement that you occupy the property in order to preserve your life estate. You have the right to. And that's why I want to talk to you at length, not some length, about understanding that as a life tenant, you theoretically could do all the things that a regular owner of a property, a regular owner of a fee simple could do. You could sell it. But think about that.
He's gonna wanna lie.
Do you want to pay a guy money for the right to live in this house for the rest of his life? What if he gets run over by a truck next week? You're done. You better buy a life insurance policy on him, you know. The life tenant has the right to mortgage his life estate. Well, Go to the bank, here, I'll give you a mortgage on my life estate, loan me 50 grand. Well, if I die next week, the bank has a mortgage on nothing. That's not gonna get repaid. They can't foreclose and take the fee title, that belongs to the remainder man now. So, it's not very good as collateral. One thing that it's sort of good for is you can lease it out at least. We said you didn't have to be there. You could lease it. At least if somebody's paying your rent every month, well, when you die, they'll quit. They'll quit for a couple of reasons. Number one, because you're not there to collect it, but number two, because they're out. The length of the term of their lease can't be any longer than the life of the life tenant. But at least you're only paying periodically as long as the guy's alive. I mean, so theoretically, a life tenant has those same rights as the owner of a fee title, but it's not very marketable. It's just, who wants to buy that, you know? One thing in particular that's different though, if you think about it, that's real significant. We talked about earlier that if you own the fee title, you get to will it, you get to devise it, you get to put in your will who gets it. Not now, because it's already been decided. You don't control what happens to the property upon your death. With fee title, of course you do. If you haven't already sold it, you decide where it's going. But with a life estate, it's already been decided by whoever set this thing up where it's going. Yes, sir.
So for the remainder man, though, it is a marketable deed.
Yes, it is just as transferable, but likewise, what's the market for it?
Well, I mean, it'd be almost like
Maybe,
going
maybe
with
if,
your own life insurance policy and selling that for cash today.
oh yeah, what I'm saying is, it's just that whoever buys your remainder interest doesn't know when they're gonna get to use the property. If they think your mother's about to die, well, then that's a great idea, but of course the remainder man knows his mother's about to die too, so he's just gonna put market value on that thing. Hell, next week I'm gonna own it. Why should I discount my remainder interest based on the life expectancy of somebody I know is gonna die anyway? Because basically next week I'll be the fee owner. So, but if the life tenant were somebody young, then there's a, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there are ways, the IRS has tables for evaluating life estates. Life estate has a value, and the remainder interest has a value. And it's percentages. Of the 100% value of owning this piece of property straight up, based on the life expectancy of the life tenant, the IRS has tables, they're annuity tables. If the life tenant is real young, then maybe the life estate is worth 75% of the value of the property. Conversely, if you know, it's easy to argue the other side. We'll get into that in a minute because that does arise. But this is the life estate as created voluntarily by the owner of the fee simple. That's what we're talking about. The other reason that life estates are important is what's called a legal life estate. A legal life estate is created by law. And we're going to talk about some of those situations of how they come about. There's one concept here I want to mention to you in the book, though, before I skip over, called dower, D-O-W-E-R. Dower was sort of a legal life estate and a spouse, but here's what's important to know. Florida has abolished dower. By statute, Florida has said there is no dower period right in Florida anymore. So it's a nice old English archaic concept, but it's not relevant anymore in Florida. Now, in order to understand legal life estates in Florida, life estates that arise by operation of law rather than by voluntary action, which is what we talked about a minute ago. Remember, we talked about owner of the fee decides to do a deed. Deed somebody the remainder and keep the life estate, or deed somebody life estate and keep the remainder. Either one. voluntary action, I meant to do this. By operation of law, there's another way they come about. But I want to get into a larger concept for a moment that's not in the textbook, but is huge important in Florida, that ends up with one of these legal life estates, and that's homestead. And I want to talk to you about Florida homestead. This is a real important issue. It is incredibly complicated. Homestead in Florida is known as the legal chameleon. That's because some author who writes about it entitled it that. And it's candidly because it keeps changing based on court opinions. Our precedent from the courts we talk about, courts keep defining and redefining what homestead is, again and again differently from time to time. And it's because it arises in three different contexts. And the first one is the easiest one, and of course we'll do that first. And that's the homestead exemption from real estate taxes. Most of you know what that is. If you own a home in Florida and you live there, it's your primary residence, you're entitled to either a $25,000 or a $50,000 exemption on the assessed value of your property for real estate taxes. It's not worth going into the 25 and 50 as to which is which. The point is, it's an exemption from real estate taxes. A portion of your real estate, not exempt. It reduces your real estate taxes if you have what's called homestead exemption. And you go into the tax assessor and you show them a copy of your bills that you live there, and you show that it's your address on your driver's license and all the stuff you do, a laundry list of proving, yeah, I really live there. Here's the deed, I own it. And here's all the proof that I live there, that's homestead exemption. Your real estate tax bill is reduced as compared to somebody who doesn't have homestead exemption in the same property. Okay, that's the first one, and that's the easy one. I own it, I live there. There's a second thing. Florida has built into its constitution an exemption of the homestead from creditors. This is hugely important. One piece of property, your home, your homestead. If you own your homestead in Florida, you own it, you live there. Now there are a few more tests now. And people also live there who are dependent upon you for your earnings. You are the head of the family, you own the homestead. That homestead is exempt from judgments by creditors. Somebody sues you for $1 million because they fell in your empty swimming pool and got hurt, you're exempt. Your homestead is exempt. You aren't exempt. They cannot attach that piece of property for your debt. Any type of creditor. It's important not only in the creditor situation we talked about where somebody sues you and gets a judgment against you, because a creditor, you get a judgment against somebody, you can levy on all their assets. You can take their car, you can take their boat, you can take their real estate, but you can't take their homestead. Okay. And there's a lot of people that say that isn't fair. What if you're Donald Trump and it's a $25 million house? Well, that's tough. That's a $25 million exemption for him and a $100,000 exemption for you and me for our houses, but that's it. The homestead is exempt. It also becomes important when you die, because your estate's going to have creditors, and those creditors in the estate likewise can't, even when you're no longer alive. If it was your homestead when you died, it is exempt within your estate, and therefore your creditors cannot collect their claims from the value of your homestead. Yes, sir.
Weren't they able to get Bernie Madoff's house?
I'm sorry, just did.
Bernie Madoff, weren't they able to get his homestead house here in Fort Lauderdale?
I don't think Bernie Madoff was a resident of Florida, was he?
Yeah, he was.
Was he?
Yeah.
Maybe. With Palm Beach?
Or maybe it was Palm Beach.
Was he here?
No.
I know he had a couple of boats here. I didn't know he had a house here. I honestly didn't know.
It was his homestead here, but I think they were able to get it. Courts have occasionally, but rarely, eroded this concept
where they could determine that the homestead was acquired by funds illegally obtained.
Oh, okay.
And that's how they do it.
Didn't
And that's how they go
O.J.
after
Simpson-
Scott
that's what-
Rosting's house and stuff like that, you know? I'm sorry?
Didn't O.J. Simpson buy some real estate in Florida after he
Yeah,
did?
O.J. owns a piece of property in Miami, and it's his homestead, and it's exempt, yeah. And as I know you know, the families have a $20 million judgment, and they're chasing around everywhere. He's got a pension from the NFL that he can't touch, and he's got a piece of property in Miami that's his homestead. And they can't touch either one of those.
Even though technically he's not living there.
I'm sorry?
Doesn't he have to reside there for at least 6 months out of the year?
For what, I'm sorry?
Doesn't O.J. Simpson have to reside in his property for at least 6 months out of the year?
For 25 years, did you say?
No,
6 months.
For 6 months.
There are certain definitions of how often you have to be there. But everybody has a legal residence. You only have one though. Now, Fort Lauderdale could be my legal residence and I can travel around the world for 4 years. My legal residence is still Fort Lauderdale. That's my homestead. I intend to return. It's exempt. The fact that I'm traveling a lot has nothing to do with it. Everybody has a residence somewhere. You only got one of them. And but absence, absence is not a test. Absence is sometimes a test in that first situation we talked about for real estate taxes. The property appraiser will try to make you prove, I think that you're there more than 6 months out of the year, and that's their over-under thing for snowbirds. You know, all the people who live in New York say, oh yeah, I live in Florida, because Florida doesn't have estate taxes, and because Florida has a homestead exemption. So they all say they're residents down here. But they got New York driver's licenses and they vote in New York, and you know, so a lot of those tests get kind of weird on that. But on this constitutional exemption, if it is your primary residence and if people are dependent upon you for support, it is exempt from creditors, period. And exempt in your estate even when you're dead and you're not living there anymore. Okay, now, believe it or not, those are the easy ones. The complicated homestead issue, and the one which involved a legal life estate, is the concept that was sort of like dower that was in your text that we said doesn't apply anymore. And it's the concept built into the Florida Constitution and the Florida statutes to protect the surviving widow and the surviving children. And that's what this thing is all about, is Florida law says that if you own a homestead, right now I'm talking about a person who dies, okay? If you, when you die, own a homestead, you may not devise that property. You may not will that property to anybody else except your spouse. If you have a spouse, or if you have minor children upon the time of your death. So what Florida is saying is, guys, if you own a house and your wife and kids live there with you, you don't get to have a will and give it to your girlfriend. Period. Florida says that's invalid. It's a homestead. Rights are going to pass, and here's what's going to pass.
Probably already died in the first place.
Life estate to the wife, remainder to the children. And that's where these things come into play. And this is a legal life estate in Florida. The tough part in these tests is deciding what's a homestead. And the courts are all over the map on this. This is often, did you live there or didn't you live there? Did you still earn a living and support your